Sadistic serial killer Michael Madison. 2 weeks shy of Halloween 1977, Michael Madison was born on October 15th in Cleveland, Ohio. His parents, Diane Madison and John Baldwin, accidentally got pregnant and didn't have much of a relationship at the time of his birth. John Baldwin left Diane to care for their young son and denied being Michael's father. Growing up, Diane's mother had been a sex worker and heroin addict. She grew up in a household full of neglect. Diane's upbringing left her unprepared to care for her young son independently. Shortly after giving birth to her son, Michael, social workers were brought into the home. Diane was allowing her constant stream of boyfriends to punish Michael. When Michael was 2, Diane was found to have forcefully stuffed food down Michael's throat. As a result, the toddler began vomiting uncontrollably. Unsure of what to do, Diane put her screaming son into a tub full of hot water. This caused Michael to cry more. Growing frustrated with her young son, Diane took him out of the bath and beat him with an extension cord. A year later, one of Diane's many boyfriends beat Michael so severely with a belt that the young boy vomited and needed to be hospitalized. In another horrific incident, Michael was beaten so severely by another one of Diane's boyfriends that he lost hearing in one of his ears. After years of abuse, Michael was sent to live with his grandmother, who was still a heroin addict and sex worker. But unfortunately, Michael's horrific childhood wouldn't change. Michael continued to be hospitalized for reasons such as dehydration. The social workers involved in Michael's case would note that he and his half-brother were covered in scratches and bruises. Before Michael reached high school, he had become a familiar face to law enforcement. On several occasions, the teenager had been found using lemon. In high school, he received a delinquent charge for inappropriately touching another classmate. The crimes Michael committed as a teenager were nothing like the ones he would go on to commit as an adult. In July 2013, the family of 38-year-old Angela Deskins reported her missing after they hadn't heard from her since June. Deskins was known for disappearing from time to time, so the family didn't think much of it. A month after she went missing, her body was discovered wrapped in electrical cords with a belt around her neck. 28-year-old Shadisha Sheely was reported missing in September 2012 when she didn't show up at her mother's house. Sheely, along with her 12-year-old daughter, were living with extended family at the time, and Sheely was supposed to stop by her mother's house to borrow some money, but she never showed. Her body was found in July 2013 inside a plastic garbage bag. After returning home from her job at an elementary school, 18-year-old Sherelda Terry disappeared. Her body was also found inside a black trash bag. On July 19, 2013, Michael's neighbors called the police to report a horrible smell coming from the garage near his second-floor apartment building. Inside the garage, the police discovered the decomposing body of a woman. During the police search of the surrounding area, including other vacant homes and backyards, the police found the bodies of 2 more women. Each was wrapped in plastic bags and located approximately 200 yards apart. The police were granted a search warrant for Michael's home, and inside they found further evidence of decomposition. Now the search was on to find where Michael Madison was. The police tracked him down to his mother's house. When they arrived, Michael refused to come out, resulting in a several-hour-long standoff between him and the police before he finally agreed to come out and was taken into police custody. Michael never once showed remorse to the victims' families during the trial. Michael laughed, smiled, and taunted the families. During Sherelda Terry's father's victim impact statement, Michael smiled at the distraught father. This set Terry's father off, and he tried to attack Michael but was quickly stopped. Michael didn't stop smiling once during the altercation. The jury deliberated less than a day before Michael Madison was found guilty of all 3 murders. He was also found guilty of 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of gross abuse of a corpse, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of weapons possession by an ex-convict. On May 20th, 2016, Michael was sentenced to death, a sentence he would attempt to appeal a month later. On July 21, 2020, the Ohio Supreme Court voted unanimously to uphold the death sentence for Michael Madison. killer Ronald O'Brien. Children are cautioned from an early age not to accept candy from strangers. While this golden rule is strictly enforced by vigilant parents throughout the year, on Halloween night, they throw caution to the wind and allow their little ones to go door to door asking for treats. In most instances, their request is granted without worry. Even so, once in a while, the monsters that lurk in the shadows take advantage of the occasion, resulting in dire consequences for the most innocent among us. In 1974, a boy in Pasadena, Texas fell victim to just such a predator when he became violently ill after indulging in a treat from his Halloween bag. Ever the concerned parent, his father had stayed by his side during the hour-long ordeal, offering comfort to the youngster as he convulsed on the bathroom floor. Only 8 years old at the time, Timothy O'Brien died later that night on his way to the hospital. In a shocking turn of events, an autopsy revealed that he had ingested enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 grown men. As difficult as it was to believe, all signs pointed to the fact that someone had deliberately laced candy with the colorless compound before randomly handing it out to unsuspecting children. Investigators were convinced that a cold-blooded killer was hiding somewhere in the suburbs of Houston, and they intended to find him. With no suspects in mind and little evidence to go on, detectives theorized that an unscrupulous person who was angry at the world in general had decided to take the life of a complete stranger, a child no less, as a way of getting back at society. To make a difficult situation even worse, there was no telling how many children had received the tainted sweets. Although authorities had put out an emergency news bulletin requesting that all Halloween candy be brought to the police station for inspection, they feared that there would be other victims before all was said and done. While they faced an uphill battle, to be sure, investigators did have a few things working in their favor. For one, it had been raining heavily on the evening of Trick or Treat, which had limited the number of houses that Timothy and his sister Elizabeth had visited. More importantly, a chemical analysis of the contents of the boys' treat bag had enabled them to pinpoint the carrier of the poison. Lab tests revealed that the killer's lethal weapon of choice had been the sweet and sour powder contained inside of a straw-shaped pixie sticks. After meeting with the residents of the houses where the O'Brien children were known to have gotten candy, detectives were confident that none of them had given up pixie sticks. However, during the course of their interviews, they learned that someone had been witnessed doling out that particular treat and that someone had been Timothy's father, Ronald O'Brien. When he was brought in for questioning, O'Brien claimed that a man he had never seen before had emerged from a darkened home and given him several pixie sticks to hand out on his behalf. He added that, after consuming a small amount of the sugary powder, Timothy had complained that it tasted funny. Instead of telling him to throw it out, he had given his son a soft drink to help wash it down. Under the pretense of helping police solve the case, he had readily provided them with the address of the house where the exchange had taken place. Upon speaking with the mystery man, who turned out to be an air traffic controller named Courtney Melvin, officers learned that he had an alibi for the night in question. According to him, he had been at work and had not returned home until well after midnight. When they visited his place of employment, his supervisor confirmed his story and had the paperwork to prove it. In a stunning show of support, 200 of Melvin's coworkers came forward to vouch for his character. Realizing that they had been duped, investigators quickly concluded that this man was not their killer, something that Ronald O'Brien had known all along. A bit of digging into his past uncovered that Ronald O'Brien, who had trained as an optician, was not nearly as respectable as he wanted others to believe. A malcontent who couldn't hold a job, he was drowning in a sea of debt. Not above taking what he wanted, he had been accused of stealing on numerous occasions, usually by former employers. While being shiftless and prone to theft doesn't necessarily mean that someone is capable of murder, the fact that O'Brien had taken out hefty life insurance policies, not 1 but 3, on his children in the months prior to his son's untimely death moved him to the top of the list of suspects. Another nail in O'Brien's self-constructed coffin came when it was discovered that he had phoned the insurance company on the morning after his son's death, inquiring about a payout. As the 8-year-old's body lay in the icy morgue, his father's only concern had been how quickly the money he had coming would change hands. On November 5, 1974, less than a week after Timothy was poisoned, Ronald O'Brien was taken into custody and formally charged with 1 count of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. To no one's surprise, he pleaded not guilty across the board. He would steadfastly maintain his innocence throughout the trial, despite the damning evidence against him. During the proceedings, a parade of witnesses testified that O'Brien had become fixated on the properties of cyanide in the months leading up to his son's murder. His obsession led him to brazenly ask friends and family alike if they knew where he could purchase the deadly poison. He would also inquire of them if they had any idea how much of the substance it would take to kill a person. In June of 1975, 8 months after little Timothy O'Brien had been laid to rest, his father was convicted of his murder. He was also found guilty in the attempted poisonings of the other 4 children, none of whom had ingested the lethal powder. For his crimes, Ronald O'Brien, whom the press had dubbed the Candyman, was condemned to the electric chair. Down the road, as alternative methods of execution were introduced, his punishment was amended to a more humane death by lethal injection. It had taken the jury just over an hour to decide the fate of the man who had so callously plotted and carried out the murder of someone who had trusted him implicitly. Once the verdict was in, the waiting game began. As it happened, 9 years would pass, more time than Timothy had spent on this earth, before his killer would face final justice. During his time on death row, O'Brien was reviled by his fellow inmates who, despite their own misdeeds, considered him to be lower than a snake's belly. Their hatred of the child killer ran so deep that they had thrown a party on the day of his demise to let him know that he would not be missed. After several days of execution, O'Brien was put to death on March 31st, 1984, at the age of 39. When asked if he had any last words, he had taken the opportunity to rail against the system that had allowed him to come to such an end. When his death was announced over the loudspeaker, hundreds of people who had gathered outside the prison to celebrate the occasion had shouted trick or treat while throwing handfuls of candy in the air in remembrance of Timothy, a young boy who had paid the ultimate price for his father's greed. Todd Allen Reed, the Forest Park killer. The bodies of 3 women were found in the same stretch of parkland, all within a month of each other. It was not long before police had their man. But is he responsible for more than the 3 murders they convicted him for? 32-year-old Todd Allen Reed was already a registered sex offender when he strangled to death at least 3 women before dunking their naked bodies in Forest Park, a heavily wooded area just west of Portland, Oregon. From 1992 to 1995, he had served a measly 2.5 years of a 12-year sentence for the sexual assault of Shelley Harding, who was 7 months pregnant at the time of his cowardly attack. She had been walking home from work when he approached her and forced her into his car at knife point. Reed was involved to him and fled the scene of a minor crash with another vehicle on his way to the secluded spot where he sexually assaulted Shelley. After he had assaulted her, he attempted to strangle her with a seatbelt and began to cry. Shelley was strong and she was calm. She had been talking to Reed constantly, like he was a friend almost, building a rapport. Whilst doing so, she made sure to leave as much physical evidence as she could, touching every surface to leave as many of her prints as possible. Whatever this monster was going to do to her, she wasn't going to make it easy for him to get away with. When Reed broke down, she used this to her advantage, and her pleas to be let go and her promises that she would not tell anyone worked. Reed let her go. Not only did Shelley report her abduction and assault, the 2 men that had been in the car that Reed had crashed into also reported the hit and run. They even had his license plate. Reed pleaded no contest and was handed the 12-year sentence. He was registered as a sex offender and, crucially, his DNA was taken and stored in the state crime lab. This would be the golden ticket police needed to catch the Forest Park serial killer 7 years later. Reed was released early as he had built up sentence-reducing credits, half of which were for good behavior. At roughly 8 miles long and 5,100 acres, Forest Park is one of the largest urban forest reserves in the USA, ranked 19th to be more precise. It is not easy to wander from the 70 miles of trails due to the park's dense vegetation. To highlight just how secluded this park can get, once you're off trail, in 2004, a 53-year-old man called Frank and his 12-year-old daughter Ruth were discovered to be living off-grid in the park. They had been there for 4 years, completely undetected. On May 7, 1999, a couple walking their dog on one of the park's more remote trails would come across the body of 28-year-old Wella Faye Mahler. She was naked and face down, entangled in thick blackberry brambles. She had been strangled, and it was determined that her body had been there for around 2 months. Police would find a used condom merely 28 feet from her body. They were able to extract DNA from this vital piece of evidence. The next day, May 8th, police themselves would discover a second body whilst they were searching the immediate area. The body of 26-year-old Stephanie Lynn Muscle was found around a quarter of a mile away from where Lila had been discovered. She too was found naked and had been strangled. Tests would determine she had been left there less than a week before she was found. They would also recover traces of DNA on her thighs. A group of hikers would find the third body, that of 18-year-old Alexandria Eisen, in the early evening of June 2nd. Alexandria had been reported missing sometime in May. Police were unable to reach her body until the next day. Due to the location, she'd been dumped down an extremely steep slope just off of a deer path. She was found naked, and she too had been strangled. Her body was around 1/4 of a mile away from Lila and Stephanie's. After the discovery of Alexandria's body, Police Chief Charles Moves admitted that investigators had concluded they were looking for a serial killer due to the similarities of the crimes. Physically, all 3 women resembled each other, but they also had very similar life experiences. They were all homeless at the time of their deaths and had cocaine and heroin addictions, although Stephanie had just completed a detox program before her murder. Lila and Alexandria had been at some point engaged in prostitution to pay for these addictions. All 3 women were known to frequent West Burnside Street. It's also been claimed that Lila and Stephanie knew each other, although this has not been proven either way. It was determined that all 3 of the women had been murdered elsewhere and their bodies were taken to Forest Park afterwards. Toxicology all showed that they had taken heroin sometime before their deaths. The police response was immediate and it was impressive. A specialist task force consisting of 16 individuals was formed, and they set about scouting bars, reaching out and offering protection to the community being targeted, and 30 additional beds were made available for homeless women during the investigation. Although residents were not happy about the lack of information they were receiving, the police kept their investigation tightly under wraps. Such was their determination to catch this killer. The task force would use the physical similarities of the 3 women to their advantage. A female officer of a similar appearance posed as a prostitute on West Burnside Street to see if they could reel the killer in. And sure enough, Reed took the bait. On the July 7th, the same day a vigil was being held for Lila, Stephanie, and Alexandria, Reed approached the undercover officer, and it was not long before his suspicious behavior flagged him to police. At about 5:20 a.m., he was approached by a member of the lookout team, Sergeant John Botchlet. Reed readily admitted that he was a sex offender and agreed to a search of his vehicle. They found an unused condom, a book entitled A Killing Gift, about a woman who can kill men by merely looking at them, and some yellow strapping. There was nothing incriminating to be found, and the police had to let him go. He was not off the hook, however, far from it. Another lookout that night, Detective Sergeant Dave Schlegel, recognized him from the 1992 sexual assault case. He had in fact been the arresting officer. Police began 24-hour surveillance of Reed, both at his home and at his place of work. At least once during this surveillance, he was observed driving in circles around West Burnside and Sandy Boulevard. The police swab results came back and confirmed that the DNA from the condom at the Moore crime scene and the DNA found on Stephanie's thighs matched the DNA that was on file for Todd Allen Reed. At around 7:30 p.m. on July 18th, after Reed had left for work, police executed a search warrant at his address, where he lived with his girlfriend. Once the police had left the premises, his girlfriend phoned him to let him know the police had been there. He attempted to make a getaway in the middle of his shift, but it was too late. The police had already arrived. At 11:30 p.m. on July 18th, 11 days after police had questioned him and only 1.5 months after the task force was set up, Reed was arrested outside of Ranella Produce, the warehouse where he worked night shifts, unloading the delivery trucks. On July 27th, he was indicted on 7 criminal counts in relation to 3 homicides. It emerged that Reed, who had been ordered to serve 8 years post-prison supervision and actually been kicked out of a sex offender treatment program 2 weeks before his arrest for failure to attend. On February 23, 2001, he pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Reed had been facing the death penalty, but his plea deal took this off of the table. Reed is also the prime suspect in 2, possibly 3, other murders in the Portland area. The cases being referred to by Reed are the 1987 cold case murders of 15-year-old Jennifer Lyncher and 12-year-old Mindy Colleen Thomas, and the 1999 disappearance of 19-year-old Alma Vecines. In regards to the murders, Gresham Police Sergeant David Lerwick has been quoted as saying, "Always suspect that he was the person who killed both those girls. We didn't have enough evidence to convict him." Jennifer had gone missing on July 3, 1987, and her skeletal remains was found on July 8, 1988. Mingy went missing from the apartment complex where she lived on August 3, 1987, and her body was discovered on October 4, 1988. Both of the children had been strangled and dumped in wooded areas on the eastern side of Gresham, about 3 miles apart, and they were both last seen in the company of Gail Bennett, Reed's then girlfriend and later wife. They married in 1988 and divorced in 1997. Gresham police said Bennett, who has a police record of her own, might have information about the killings but has been uncooperative. Bennett has denied any knowledge. At the time, police were operating under the assumption that they had both been killed by the same man, and that this man was known to them. They had questioned Reed at the time of the investigation due to the fact they had both been seen with Gail, but he was never charged or arrested. Police renewed efforts to solve the Gresham cases after his arrest in the Portland killings, but attempts to compare DNA from the old crimes with Reed's DNA have been inconclusive. Alma the witness seen on June 30, 1999, and has not been seen since. She was working as a prostitute at the time of her disappearance, and it has been claimed she knew/was friends with Alexandria Eisen. No charges have been brought forward in her case, although it is impossible to downplay the likelihood they already had something to do with Ametha's disappearance. As of June 2020, what prison Reed is in is not known, and as of June 2021, he was no longer listed as an inmate and may be dead. The case of Paula Ortega. In early 2023, the city of Sangolquí in Ecuador's Pichincha region was rocked by a tragic incident. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community, but its motive, a mere $600 theft. Could the life of 37-year-old Paula Ortega Alcocer really be valued at just $600? Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's father, in his youth, began building a business supplying party goods across Ecuador. The venture became quite successful, enabling him to start his own production of balloons, piñatas, and other festive paraphernalia. This expansion led to the opening of several stores. The Alcocer family's party shops were located not only in Sangolquí, but also in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each family member played a role in the development and maintenance of their enterprise. The father expanded the main production line, opening new workshops for balloons, garlands, caps, and various party items. Each of the 3 children managed a store, tailoring it to their vision. Paula's entrepreneurial spirit led her beyond just managing a store. She organized a party planning service within the company, which turned out to be a great success. It seemed Paula had found her calling, bringing joy to people, which made her truly happy. While the business ventures of the Ortega family flourished for a long time, unfortunately, Paula Ortega's personal life was not as successful. Despite her youthful and joyous demeanor, she faced significant hardships in her private life. Paula's first marriage to Carlos Pedro turned out to be unhappy. After the birth of their daughter, Carlos developed an alcohol addiction. He began disappearing from home and stealing money from Paula's store. His infidelity was the last straw, leading Paula to end the marriage and find herself alone with her daughter. This period was particularly challenging for Paula. as she lost hope in finding personal happiness. However, the psychological support of her family and her passion for her work helped her regain a sense of normalcy in her life. A decade later, Paula met Christian Diego. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome man, Christian was 4 years younger than Paula. Having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was cautious with the persistent young suitor. Christian proved to be calm and reliable, quickly bonding with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed Paula. After 2 years of relationship, her heart warmed to him, leading to a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian embraced Paula's daughter as his own, and they soon welcomed another daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 years together, with Christian fully integrating into Paula's father's company. He was entrusted with finding locations for new stores, which often kept him away from home. Coming from a modest working-class family, Christian had always dreamed of owning a large business. Unfortunately, some people can conceal their dark sides so well that one might live for years alongside ruthless criminals without suspecting a thing. However, the truth eventually comes to light when evil erupts in the most unexpected ways. Paula Ortega and her husband, Christian, appeared to be the epitome of a happy, successful couple to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, this perception was only surface deep. In 2000, Paula's father passed away after a long illness. His death not only devastated the family, but also turned their business upside down. Christian, driven by a desire for power and the wealth it brought, eagerly sought to take Paula's father's place in the business. However, his lack of skill led to one failed deal after another. As a result, Christian began to vent his frustration on his family. Initially in secret, but later openly, he began to abandon his family, indulging in a life of debauchery. Women and alcohol became his escape into a world of pleasure and recklessness. With Paula's father no longer there to restrain him, Christian's true nature began to surface. Having already experienced a traumatic marriage, Paula refused to endure this behavior again. The couple's home became a battleground of endless scandals, revealing Christian's true nature as an ambitious egotist, craving only power and unquestioned obedience. After a particularly nasty argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing her husband's reaction. The news of this drastically changed Christian's behavior. Unwilling to lose his place in the successful family, he stopped his outrageous conduct and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, and professed his love and value for his family. His eloquence persuaded Paula. Not wanting to be alone again, she gave him a second chance. In a gesture of reconciliation, Christian suggested organizing a romantic dinner at their home. Paula agreed. She sent their daughters to her parents' house and began preparing for the evening. Inside, she was aflutter with excitement. Deep down, she still dreamed of a happy, strong family and was doing everything she could to preserve it. The evening at the Ortega home was one of celebration and comfort. The living room was lit up with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly illuminated by the yellow glow of candles. Christian uncorked a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night could have been genuinely reconciliatory, had it not been for a sudden proposal from Christian that disrupted the peace. Christian, a co-owner of the Alcazar company, revealed to his wife a significant misstep. In his pursuit to replace Paula's father and gain full control, he had made a costly mistake in an important tender, leading to substantial losses for the company. Now, the firm desperately needed a new investor, implying that a part of the company would officially change hands. Paula was adamantly against this, believing her father's business should remain a family affair. Despite Christian's persuasion, she stood her ground, infuriating him. He had already found an investor and was eager to complete the deal without complications. Their dinner, and by extension their relationship, soured. January 2nd, 2023, seemed like any other day. Paula took her younger daughter to the playroom before heading to her shop for work. She had a large order to prepare, involving assembling balloon fountains and party decorations for a themed event. During her lunch break, 2 men knocked on the shop's door. Although closed, Paula opened it, expecting a courier to pick up the balloon bouquets. The men, slim and dressed identically as if they were twins, startled her with their dark hoodies. They lingered, scanning the shop before splitting up. As Paula called out to them, stating the shop was closed for lunch, they cornered her against the wall. The tension of this silent scene was broken by a knock on the glass door. The men hastily exited the shop. A smiling young courier arrived, unwittingly rescuing Paula from the unknown assailants. Shaken, Paula handed over the package, closed the shop, and with trembling hands, called her mother. She was visibly frightened, a sentiment she expressed over the phone. Paula's mother suggested reporting the unsettling incident at her shop to the police, but Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright since nothing harmful had actually occurred. She didn't reopen her shop that day, her thoughts consumed by Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the two mysterious men. Seeking solace, Paula decided to take a stroll through the city. She stopped at a nearby cafe for some coffee, walked through the park to breathe in the fresh air, and then visited her sister. Over cups of fragrant tea, they engaged in a heart-to-heart conversation. Overwhelmed by the day's shocking events, Paula confided in her sister not only about the scary encounter at her shop, but also about the difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had drastically changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and openly being unfaithful. Paula chose not to mention his proposal about merging the company with a new investor, as she habitually kept her personal struggles to herself. But that day, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame over tolerating such demeaning treatment. "He's a peculiar being. My sister was lively, happy, cheerful, enterprising, hardworking, an extremely gentle and kind mother. She should have been receiving energy from him," Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, would later say. Paula spoke of her long-term life plans, her desire for her daughters to grow up and become professionals, and her intention to continue her business. She was selfless and tirelessly hardworking, Adriana recalled. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. A phone call from Christian interrupted her. He was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would come to the shop to pick her up as well. His hurried speech was interspersed with children's voices. Paula didn't get a chance to tell him about the frightening incident at her shop, especially since she suspected him to be involved. Reluctantly, Paula returned to work, once again prioritizing her family's well-being over her own. She didn't have to wait long. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't deny his little princess. He informed Paula that the girls were at home and eagerly waiting for hamburgers for dinner. In what has become a modern family tradition, Christian took Paula not to the nearest fast food joint, but to a restaurant courtyard at a shopping center, several blocks from their home. Parking the car beside a secluded wall and locking it securely, he left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a taxing day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the impending danger. Shortly, she recognized two familiar figures near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Recognizing them as the unexpected visitors from her shop, Paula tried to stay calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. Suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. In a panic, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms. But she was trapped with no escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before darkness enveloped her. Paula sustained 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. After the brutal attack, the assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantically, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack, before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving necessary medical attention. Christian, overwhelmed by grief and shock at the loss of his wife, reacted with loud cries and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The sudden violent end of Paula Ortega left a community in shock and a family in profound grief, raising questions about the motive and identity of the attackers. The initial theory of the prosecution was a violent end inflicted during a robbery. It was later discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse. This began an investigation. The prosecution's theory was confirmed when footage from city cameras showed two unknown men who had visited Paula's store earlier that day in the vicinity. Both were in hoodies, making it impossible to create a clear image of their faces, and their vague descriptions provided no clarity. 2 months after the tragic event, Paula's family demanded justice. But the investigation was at a standstill. A turning point came when Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, gave testimony casting doubt on Christian's innocence. She informed the investigators about a conversation she had with Paula on the day of the incident. Adriana also mentioned that Christian regularly committed infidelity and domestic violence against Paula, who was contemplating divorce. This provided a perfect motive, as Christian, driven by ambition, could not afford to lose his wealth and status in the event of a divorce. The prosecution investigated this angle. During a search of their home, incriminating messages were found on Christian's phone, indicating multiple affairs and turbulent marital relations. A critical piece of evidence was documentation prepared for the transfer of the company to a private individual, which Paula had refused to sign. Following these revelations, the incident was investigated as a suspected homicide. As the prosecution continued to gather information implicating Christian Diego, new evidence emerged, unraveling the complex web of the couple's relationship. 2 weeks after the incident, we found out he transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, said Adriana, Paula's sister, adding another layer of suspicion to the already convoluted case. The most shocking aspect, as claimed by relatives, was that Christian made a payment using Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. Instead of immediately helping his gravely wounded wife, Christian seemingly bided his time. Investigations confirmed this information. The identity of the woman who received the transfer from Christian that day was established as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. Urgently summoned for questioning, she revealed that she had noticed her bank card missing a couple of days earlier, but didn't think much of it, as her brother often used her card. The electronic payment records showed a transfer of $2,000 from Christian on January 2nd at 20:05. However, Laura denied any acquaintance with Christian. Her solid alibi at the time of the incident absolved her of any involvement. She was released, and the investigation hit a dead end again. Days later, Laura returned to the police, stating her brother had returned the bank card, as she had suspected. She provided a full description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. In the chaos of fleeing the crime scene, one attacker forgot to pull up his hood. The identities of Byron and Mortines Castillo, two repeat offenders with a substantial criminal history, were established. The brothers were apprehended. But what could possibly link two seasoned criminals to a seemingly respectable and successful family man? Further investigation revealed that the attacks on Paula had been carried out repeatedly by the Castillo brothers. But why were these repeat offenders targeting this young woman? On December 8, 2022, Paula Ortega faced a harrowing incident at a gas station when her car was stolen. Distracted by a young man, his accomplice quickly jumped behind the wheel and sped off. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car that day. Surveillance footage identified the two familiar culprits. Coincidentally, on the day of the theft, Paula unknowingly came face to face with her future assailant. However, the car theft case took an unexpected turn when Christian intervened, claiming the thieves had contacted him. He met with them and retrieved all of Paula's personal belongings, including her wallet. This development cast further doubt on Christian's innocence. Seasoned investigators were puzzled by the widower's boldness in shielding the criminals. Surveillance cameras played a crucial role in identifying the carjackers. As Christian realized he was under suspicion, he concocted a new defense narrative involving extortion by two criminal brothers demanding a large sum of money. But before he could deploy his version of events, the police executed a swift interrogation strategy. Separating the suspects and suggesting one had confessed, they obtained a confession from Martin Castillo. He admitted that more than 2 months earlier, Christian had paid them $2,000 to murder his wife, promising another $2,000 after the deed. During a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the terrified woman. Realizing the crime was uncovered, He remorselessly divulged all details of their arrangement with Christian. Martin revealed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also parts of Christian's plan to pressure her. By chance, Paula lived a few hours longer than intended. On November 29, 2023, all three suspects appeared in court. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the murder day, pieced together from various sources. Videos from surveillance cameras in the area where Christian parked the car, subjected to audio and video forensic analysis, unveiled a chilling, soul-freezing narrative. In chilling surveillance footage, Christian Diego is seen exiting his car and heading towards a shopping center elevator. Moments later, he remotely unlocks his car from half a block away, allowing two assailants to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report noted Christian's odd behavior post-attack, repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, pausing, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Surprisingly, upon finding his wife bleeding profusely, he showed no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a distant hospital. Christian's actions, meticulously reconstructed from surveillance videos, particularly in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, were cold and calculating. As she bled in the car but was still alive, Christian, standing nearby, callously transferred money to his accomplices for the assault. Paula's family lawyers urged the court to consider these videos as aggravating factors in the crime. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves the crime was premeditated. Hours before the attack, around 1:30 p.m., two individuals entered Paula's store, dropped off nearby by Christian. This implies the crime was intended to occur earlier, during the lunchtime closure, when Paula was alone. Prosecutor Marlon Calderon highlighted inconsistencies. How did the assailants know the couple would be at the eatery if they weren't tailing them? Yet they arrived on time to commit the crime. Christian's actions, not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the eatery, his 1,000 times pacing before aiding his wife, phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic, are key evidence for charging him with orchestrating the femicide. Femicide, defined as the intentional murder of a woman simply because she is a woman, was a central theme in the trial of Christian and Paula Ortega's troubled relationship. Shockingly present in today's society, this hate crime was exemplified through Christian's younger age, which seemed to fuel his contempt and abuse towards Paula. Despite her success, Paula lived in a metaphorical golden cage, masking and enabling her husband's tyrannical behavior, allowing him to assert dominance. Years of silence culminated in Christian's sinister plot to seize control of Paula's thriving party empire and gain sole guardianship of their daughter, Maria. Testimonies from over 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, alongside thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. Without legal signing rights, he sought to coerce Paula into transferring her company shares. However, his plan failed. Christian didn't physically harm Paula but inflicted severe psychological abuse, artfully concealed under the guise of a perfect family life. According to the Prosecutor General's report, video evidence led to Christian's preventive isolation as the crime's orchestrator. This measure isn't an arrest but a strategy to neutralize a societal threat. Following this action, Christian planned to flee. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, accused of orchestrating his wife's demise, his defense team worked tirelessly to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute crucial evidence like surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. Desperate, the defense then attempted to depict the accused as suffering from a mental disorder, citing episodes of sudden rage. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but he was declared competent. His defense counsel, realizing the gravity of the situation, advised Christian to flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and suggesting he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to escape justice failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets raised alarm bells with the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly ordered an 8-hour detainment of Christian Diego, followed by charges and the disclosure of case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Pending trial, the suspect was held in preliminary detention, pursued as the alleged mastermind behind a heinous act that left 2 young children motherless and an entire family grieving an irreplaceable loss. The Ortega family demands justice for this atrocious crime, emphasizing the devastating impact on the children and their irreplaceable loss. In a case that gripped public attention, the jury concluded that Christian and his 2 accomplices were guilty of a meticulously planned, intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful Christian and his associates were sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Rumiñahui expressed their solidarity with the tragic loss of Paola Alcocer. The institution extends its deepest sympathies to the family and friends affected by this incident. The unfortunate demise of this esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife, who contributed significantly to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those in her circle, is deeply mourned. Their statement read, "Paola's case emerged as a prominent instance of violence against women, following the Latin American Association for Alternative Development's report of 332 fatalities due to gender-based violence in 2022. Today, our story repeats the biblical story of the first crime on earth. As the book of Genesis states, and Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This occurred after Cain had sacrificed to the Almighty the fruits of the earth, and Abel the firstborn lambs. To the disappointment of the older man, God accepted the younger man's sacrifice and rejected his gifts. Driven by selfish jealousy, Cain called Abel to the field, and there took his life. But unfortunately, even in the modern world, because of unhealthy jealousy, the older brother can kill the younger one. The end of June 2010 was very difficult for the family of Donna and Samuel Eckerd. Their 19-year-old son Sean was missing. The night before, Sean had a fight with his older brother Stanley and left the house slamming the door. Sean had never previously allowed himself to leave the house for long periods of time without his phone or informing his mother. Late that night, the whole family was alarmed by the young man's disappearance. But officially, the search for the boy began only 24 hours later. Missing person notices with photos of smiling, blonde-haired Sean were posted at all stations, in supermarkets, and along the streets. But even after 2 days of searching, there were no results. The police had their hands up in the air as they continued their search. For more than 2 days, Sean Paul Eckerd was officially missing. Relatives, acquaintances, and a few friends gathered a team of activists who day and night combed local establishments, interviewed random passers-by, and minute by minute reconstructed the route of the guy that night. The police, without stopping the search, began to look more closely into the habits and rhythm of the Eckerd family, to reconstruct the sequence of events leading up to Sean's disappearance. Donna and Samuel Eckerd married with a history of family relationships. They had 6 adult children from previous marriages. After experiencing difficulties and setbacks in their early unions, they found their safe haven in each other's company and settled in San Diego, California. They rented a large, good-sized family home and attended the local church on weekends without fail. The family was devout and lived a quiet and unsociable lifestyle. A few years after the family moved in, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Sean. Donna devoted herself fully to the home and raising her sons, so the brothers grew up in love and care. They both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family participated in church activities. The eldest children, having reached adulthood, flew away from their parents' nest all over the continent to start their own families. But the Eckerd family was friendly. They kept in touch with each other, regularly called each other, and spent all family holidays together. Sean was a simple and fun-loving boy. He had a bright appearance, charisma, and insight that attracted people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and empathize, so he made friends very easily. Stanley, on the contrary, had a more reserved character and was wary of everything new. He was shy, so socializing with people was much more difficult for him than for his brother. They had one common group of friends and classmates, despite the age difference. Together, the brothers were like one, helping each other and always looking out for each other. The boys grew up well-mannered and studied very well. They always had a trusting and friendly relationship with each other. Small jokes about each other were accepted with humor by their parents. Respect was valued above all else in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from childhood with faith in God and according to God's laws. The life of the Eckerd family flowed in its own way. As the brothers grew up, their interests unnoticeably became completely opposite. The youngest, Sean, played in the music band, and the eldest, Stanley, became interested in martial arts. The life of each young boy was filled with vivid impressions and emotions, which they shared with the family in the evenings. Sean was always first. His stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans took up most of the evening time. When the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day, everyone listened to Sean. There was no time for Stanley, nor, it seemed to him, was there much to share. No grandiose plans for the future, no exciting stories, not even stories of friends to draw attention to. So Stanley humbly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Sean told his family that he had met a neighbor girl, Mary Jane. A fragile young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair put Sean in a daze. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard a magical piano playing. As if mesmerized, he went to the captivating sounds of music and entered the house without knocking. Self-confidence in his own charm allowed Sean to get out of such a funny situation with dignity and cleverly met the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Sean, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. The soul of the company, Sean often organized picnics where Mary Jane was invited. They walked a lot, visited parks and observation decks. The budding adolescent love affair was interrupted by the unfair reality of the adult world. The Eckerd family received the sad news of the illness of Dama's elderly mother, Sean and Stanley's grandmother. In search of prosperity, parents tried to take into account the interests of each member of the family, but the decision made fundamentally changes the life of the whole family. Sean did not want to leave his native land, his friends, and his Mary Jane, but the parents' decision had already been made. The Eckerds leave the city where their children were born and raised and move to another state. So in 2005, as fate would have it, the Eckerd family settles in the house of Donna's mother in the small town of Spring Hill in Florida, where they begin a new life. The move was like a breath of fresh air for the whole family, because the decision was the right one. Sean and Stanley's grandmother was on the mend. Sean's heart was broken. He missed his band, in which he played, his walks with Mary Jane and hangouts in his favorite city. But it is impossible for life-loving Sean to be sad for long, and after a while, a new life becomes as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel safely got a job at the Presbyterian church, where they were almost all their time. Donna took care of the children in the nursery, and Samuel helped with the chapel. Over the course of time, the brothers grow close again and make new acquaintances together again at school. Old life seems to be resurrected in a new place. Sean plays in the school band again. Stanley attends a martial arts school that is only a couple blocks from their new home. Despite this new busy life, Sean can't stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after class, he locks himself in his room and they talk on the phone for hours. The goodbyes are in the same way, with Sean saying he dreams of meeting again. Each time he promises that, after getting his parents' permission, he will definitely come to see her. Whereas the younger brother grew and kept his first love in his heart, the elder Stanley tried to establish himself in the family in his own way. Quiet and calm Stanley, by virtue of his stiffness and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In pursuit of self-expression, he makes a series of bad decisions that will have dire consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informs his parents that he intends to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. But youthful maximalism leads the guy into a bad company, where he begins to engage in petty fraud and try illegal drugs. In 2007, dysfunctional connections eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. The news of the elder son's shenanigans deals the first heavy blow to Donna. She ends up in the hospital with a heart attack, but the situation is quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Jennifer's sister. He skillfully defends Stanley, proving the lack of direct evidence, which allows the guy to quickly go free, receiving only a suspended sentence. This episode greatly frightens Stanley. He feels guilty and closes himself off in the hope of being understood and accepted by his family. Having survived the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Sean does not say anything to his parents about his decisions. During his summer vacation, he takes a job as a waiter. Having saved up some money, he leaves only a note for his mother to go to California to marry Jane. The long, 2-day bus ride to his beloved seemed like an eternity. The scenery changed outside the window. The day changed to night, and Sean imagined how at the final station he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the final stop and the bus stopped. Sean was ready to run to her, for he had already seen her happy face through the window and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears with her fingers. They had spent some of their happiest days together. They'd had picnics, just like they'd had in his best high school days. Sean had confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and it was mutual. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Sean felt faint. His eyes went black. He fell unconscious. Sean ended up in the hospital. The young boy was fading away like a match in a matter of days. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors diagnosed the cause of such a rapid fading of a strong and sturdy guy. Tick-borne encephalitis begins suddenly and very quickly causes complications of various kinds, up to inflammation of the brain. A difficult struggle for Sean's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month of coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him to return from the other side of the world. Sean had a very hard time recovering for a long time. An ordinary tick bite on a summer walk turned out to be a serious injury for him. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long recovery. Mary Jane was left to wait. Again, the only source of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A series of troubles and unexpected illnesses brought the Eckerd family together. Donna does everything impossible to completely rid her beloved son Sean from the consequences of a serious illness. She carefully monitors his diet and exercise. Such attentive care leads to a full recovery of Sean and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtures in bits and pieces. After a while, Sean regained his strength and returned to his studies in music. In 2009, he finishes his studies and dreams of going to his Mary Jane to return together and introduce her to his parents as his favorite. But Sean's plans are not destined to come true. Stanley introduces his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found a common language with the two brothers. Stanley was in love and sympathized with her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Sean. For some time, Stanley actively courts Samantha, and she accepts his signs of attention. Several romantic meetings end with a passionate kiss. Stanley is immensely happy, but Samantha, who said yes to her older brother, is still thinking about her younger brother. Samantha decides to write a message to Sean in which she confesses her sympathy for him and invites him for a walk around the city. The guy agrees, and they spend the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean does not seek to win the girl, after all. He has long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha writes a message to Stanley and tells him that Sean has been seeing her and confesses that he really likes her too. Stanley was furious. That same evening, he went up to his brother's room where they had a conversation. At first, the brothers talked quietly. Then their words turned into shouts. And then there was dead silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes clarified relations quite loudly, so they did not see anything special in what had happened. Mom was the first to realize Sean was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the evening before, she got Stanley's explanation that Sean had left home after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a frightening call. The caller was Sean's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call heard only a woman's scream in the receiver. A piercing male moan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally records the request for help. Jennifer continues to scream. She pleads for help and reports, "Oh, damn it, my brother Stanley killed Sean. He's in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son who's been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it. I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy observed a horrifying scene. In the backyard of the house, Samuel was kneeling on his knees, 2 hands dripping earth. He was pulling his son's body out of the damp earth, screaming and trying to wipe the earth off Sean. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood filled with sculpted lawns, where the 2 young brothers often waved to neighbors, turned into the scene of a violent tragedy. And now the Eckerd family, who once raised 2 sons, are left with the horrifying memory of digging in the ground only to find one of their sons and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckerd was detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, he revealed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Sean on the head. The resulting injury caused Sean to fall. Stanley checked his pulse. Realizing that his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it on the lawn behind the house. Stanley's words at the inquest, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." These words sound like the cold-blooded calculation of a serial killer, not a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley Eckerd said he did it for his mother. He wanted to protect her from the shock she might have received at the news. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body to rebury it once his parents were gone. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried and confessed what he had done and was obviously sorry, presenting it as an accident, or he blamed Sean with hatred in his eyes. Stanley spoke very harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother. He called him guilty for all his troubles, and admitted that he had won the rivalry for his mother's and Samantha's love. That same day, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody, without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean's body. She presented to the court the results of the forensic examination, which indicated that the victim's neck showed bruising under the skin and rope marks were present, indicating that the neck had been compressed to make breathing difficult. The examination concluded that the death was the result of an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino proceeded to scrutinize the case. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing began, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. On the second row were Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd. They wept as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom under escort. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernado Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Tatti. The defense was led by attorney Alan Hunter, while prosecutor Pete remained on the prosecution side. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense attorney Allen stated that there was a spontaneous fight that led to the tragic outcome. In closing, Allen appealed to the jury to take note of Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime in the name of good intentions. Stanley Eckerd was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted of that charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13th. Stanley's fate was in the hands of District Judge Anthony Tatti, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder is punishable by up to life in prison. Stanley Elias Eckerd always said he never intended to kill his brother 3 years ago before burying him in the front yard of the house. Before trial, Eckerd rejected an offer from prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for limiting his prison sentence to 20 years. Eckerd remained stone-faced as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept quietly. As the jury left the courtroom, Samuel Eckerd's sobs turned to screams, and numerous relatives gathered around Donna and Samuel. The jury agreed that Eckerd did not plan to kill 19-year-old Sean, but the jury did not completely absolve him of guilt. After deliberating for about 2.5 hours, 9 women and 3 men found Eckerd guilty of second-degree murder. All the while, the Eckerds said they believed Stanley's account of what happened in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later Friday, Samuel Eckerd said Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter did an excellent job. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to appeal the verdict, but were denied. "I really can't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours," Samuel Eckerd said. "Despite that, our faith was not shaken," he said. One fact was not disputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Sean's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Eckerd found Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant State's Attorney Pete Magrino began his closing arguments at trial by showing jurors photos of Sean's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the hole. "This is not a detective novel case," Magrino said. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was found, changed his testimony as many as 6 times, saying he initially knew nothing about Sean's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Sean's cell phone to family members saying that Sean had allegedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend Mary Jane. Also, on behalf of Sean, he corresponded with Samantha, saying that he did not want to communicate and she should pay attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley said that Sean had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Sean's body to protect his mother, Donna, who has a weak heart. He said he planned to tell his father after his mother left on a trip. "Those injuries that the defendant inflicted with his hands constitute murder," Magrino said, and he also called attention to testimony and Stanley's statements to detectives about rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. He also called attention to testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend about revenge in the weeks before Sean's death. In that conversation, the friend testified, Stanley said that if he was going to kill someone, he would hit the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and could not dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. "A crime involves an act with an intended result," Lanter said. Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he didn't kill his brother. Lanter pointed to testimony from a forensic pathologist who said the blow to the head, combined with other factors, Sean's high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling due to encephalitis, likely led to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand when the 2 men fell could have been enough to kill Sean. Lanter reminded the jury of the testimony of Donna Eckerd, who said that Sean suffered from severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. At one point in her testimony, Donna Eckerd called Sean's death an accident. The jury also could have found Stanley Eckerd guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter. Calling the case a pardonable homicide, Lanter asked jurors not to let gruesome photos of Sean's body and Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard distract them from what led to his death. "Stanley Eckerd did something horrible after Sean died," said Lanter, "but he's not a murderer." During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckerd parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road. But a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaped out of it, and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Cindy Luff. Sydney Irene Luff was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Luff. Sydney's family moved to Neligh in 2000, at which time she was in second grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Luffs were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out, with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Luff didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Luff had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Luff's family saw Sydney, The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat Mimsy without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menard store where she worked, at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they had conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Louf's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos. One on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Louf's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive. But no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction, and after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after a looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400,000 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I have nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loof's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loof family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loof, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, a surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours. But the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11th, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, The jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She'd like to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sydney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all!" He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loof. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017 and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch, but in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The 3 of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in the Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loof family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sydney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. A garbage collector was paralyzed on January 22, 2023, after sifting through a trash container near the Columbia Park to find what was at the bottom of it. A blue suitcase was inside, sealed with black tape, and surrounded by several garbage bags. The suitcase contained a woman's body, which was easily identified because her head was visible from the suitcase. The worker was frightened upon finding something, so he drove several blocks and reported it to the police. The Capitol Police promptly dispatched a team of officers to investigate. Can you provide some examples? The police officers who arrived were met with a horrifying scene. The corpse was cradled in the suitcase and taken away. Valentina Tres Palacios was identified as the victim a few hours later. At the outset, the body was found to be free from any indications of violence, firearms, or knives, and it was not dismembered. Can you provide some examples? After opening the suitcase, detectives discovered that the woman was wearing pajamas with a belt, suggesting that she had been attacked while sleeping by the person who killed her. A black cardboard box on the side of the suitcase contained items that helped identify the body. Police found a student ID, password used by the victim when applying for a certificate, as well as some documents and personal belongings among them. The investigating team found it peculiar, as the presence of documents in such cases was not typical. Can you provide some examples? The police contacted the woman's family after finding the suitcase with her body, and they confirmed that she was with friends on Saturday, January 21st. The woman was found to have been struck multiple times in the head during the forensic examination. Her body was found with multiple injuries, including bleeding from the right part of her tongue and 5 cuts around her neck that indicated strangulation. Valentina Tres Palacios was born on December 16, 2001 in Bogotá, Colombia. She was enrolled in the Faculty of Commerce and International Business. The girl was a music enthusiast from an early age. After completing her professional DJ diploma, she was granted access to work as a DJ in Colombia due to her exceptional talent and musical sense. She had a career that began 3 years ago and resulted in many foreign friends. Valentina traveled to other countries, where she typically gained knowledge or exhibited her accomplishments. She had the chance to perform alongside some of the most renowned musicians during this period. She toured over 20 cities in the country and was present at significant international events of this kind. Her past activities involved performing at festivals and touring throughout Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. People in her vicinity claimed that she had a bright future ahead. She was sought after and traveled throughout the nation. She dominated the best nightclubs and pursued her passion. Valentina was a very happy, smiling young girl who enjoyed the party. She maintained social media accounts where she shared her stage performances and always kept her followers informed about her daily routine. Can you provide some examples? In the electronic music industry of Colombia, she was recently recognized as the best amateur DJ. The girl shared about 2 things on her social media: her rising popularity in the electronic music industry at nightclubs and her relationship with an American named John Poulos, whom she met online by the end of 2021. John and Valentina's communication skills improved as time passed. Valentina's initial desire for stability and commitment was not strong, but her relationship with him transformed into a romantic partnership that the young people eventually shared. John Poulos was a resident of America. Valentina was so invested in her life that he sent her money to attend the cosmetic course that involved injecting her lips with hyaluronic acid. The procedure was repeated to improve her cheekbones, and John also suggested surgery and silicone breast implants for his partner, modifying her appearance within a few months and becoming the talk of the town. He started sending money to the girl on a regular basis and eventually came up with the idea of marrying her. Originally, Poulos had plans to move to Colombia and live with Valentina, but she was skeptical because this person was so envious that he hired a private detective to track all her contacts and activities. Valentina's family was highly suspicious, as she expressed her concern about this situation. John Poulos was prepared to spend the rest of his life with his partner by January 2023. He was committed to marrying Valentina and initiated the process of organizing the necessary paperwork. He rented an apartment in the northern area of Bogotá, where he planned to spend the weekends with the girl until they found a permanent place to live. On Thursday, January 19th, Poulos arrived in Bogotá. Around 8:53 p.m., he was caught on surveillance footage entering the building's apartment. Along with him, there was a blue suitcase that bore resemblance to the one used to find Valentina's corpse. John Poulos was the first person to be noticed after the disturbing discovery, as he was also the last one to have seen Valentina alive. The detective's attempt to reach him resulted in the call being diverted to voicemail. Valentina's family members found Poulos to be a kind and collected individual. His demeanor was undeniable, and his plans to marry the young woman were evident. They were unable to fathom his involvement in this terrible crime, but these doubts were eliminated when investigators arrived at the apartment rental building, where it was discovered that the man had already left and was not found. On Monday, January 23rd, John Poulos took down his social media profiles in the early morning following Valentina's death, He was the sole suspect at that point. The revelation was made evident when investigators analyzed the surveillance camera footage in the building. From Friday evening to early Sunday morning, the Colombian Police and Prosecutor's Office examined hours of video footage from cameras in the areas where the young woman and her boyfriend were. The trash container was where the body was disposed of at this point. The footage and numerous WhatsApp conversations were instrumental in uncovering the girl's final hours. On January 20th, Valentina and Poulos made a deal to meet. Can you provide some examples? The man arrived on the 19th, the day before, and took up residence in the apartment where the couple had planned to live. After he texted Valentina, they started arguing on the same night because she was at a party with her friend and didn't anticipate him coming over. He inquired about the presence of significant individuals at the gathering and whether she was with any male. She wryly replied with a no reply, stating that it was his suspicions, and they had agreed to meet on the 20th. Prior to meeting John, Valentina had planned to visit various locations to care for herself, apply her lash extensions, and attend hair salons. On January 20th, the couple were unable to see each other due to their disagreement, and only in the evening, when Valentina's apartment was being monitored by surveillance cameras, did they know exactly when they were in that parking lot. The girls' possessions were being packed by John at 6 p.m. as the two of them moved to another apartment and began a new life. Valentina's journey across the country was marked by a series of emotional goodbyes, one of which was with her family and friends. She made a video call to her mother saying that she was going home. The video depicts the girl accompanied by Poulos, who hired a vehicle to transport Valentina's possessions. They were caught on surveillance footage entering the apartment with their possessions at 7 p.m. Valentina sent her mother a series of videos showing the apartment and their frequent exchanges to get things. The cameras captured them completing the move and engaging in other activities before heading back to their new home. It was Saturday, January 21st at 1 a.m. Around 3 a.m., the couple arranged a taxi to go to southeastern New York's nightclub, where Valentina was set to perform 2 hours later. Can you provide some examples? The club was reached by them at approximately 4 a.m. Valentina commenced work almost immediately. While she was busy, John Poulos remained with her. Can you provide some examples? At approximately 5 a.m., her performance concluded. Valentina and John, holding hands, headed to the nightclub's office. They encountered the proprietor of the establishment, his spouse, and her companion. Valentina's friends had not seen her since they left the venue at 6 a.m. Her smile was back on her face, shining brightly, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Valentina contacted her friend on the phone and stated that she had no intention of going anywhere on Saturday. She stated that she would probably stay in the apartment with her partner. Later on, they might go out to eat or cook together at their house. The last time Valentina spoke to her friend was at 9 p.m., and it was through video. Valentina's mother, Laura Hidalgo, revealed that her 13-year-old son was the final individual to converse with her on video. The girl was in bed with John. They both appeared to be in a state of happiness. The family had no further information about them. On January 21st, at 10:43 p.m., surveillance cameras in the building captured the young woman and her boyfriend. In the video, Valentina can be seen peering out of the apartment door while John stands in front of it. He seems contemplative and a little menacing, pacing back and forth, occasionally grimacing his face. He orders the elevator to go down and retrieve a delivery. Poulos was captured by the cameras again on Sunday, January 22nd at 9 a.m. He exits the room with 2 bags of garbage. Valentina was nowhere to be found on this occasion. The man drives to the parking area, takes a silver car, and places the bags in the back seat. Following that, he goes back to the apartment and retrieves 2 suitcases from the trunk. Subsequently, he heads back to the apartment. A gray blanket covers the suitcase that Poulos removed from the apartment, where the clock reads 10 a.m. He put it into a cart for shipping. A second bag was situated beside it. Valentina's head was wrapped in the blanket. The man surveys the parking area after parking. He perceives that nobody is in the vicinity. Moving ahead, he looks over to make sure nobody is going down in the elevator. Subsequently, He rapidly makes his way back to the vehicle. He glances at the mirror one last time and takes a sip of water before struggling to lift the heavy suitcase, which he puts in the trunk. The bag is the next item on the list. Subsequently, he takes control of the vehicle and departs. Surveillance cameras caught the car at different locations throughout the city around noon. It was evident that the subject was in search of a suitable spot to leave the suitcase. The car entered one of the parks and parked near the garbage containers at approximately 3 p.m. The driver exited and headed towards the container at that juncture. He surveyed the area, verified that no one was watching, and then removed the suitcase, which seemed excessive, before tossing it into the container. He went back to the car and removed the bag, which he then placed in the trash bin, closed the lid, and exited. The vehicle was traveling westward until it reached El Dorado International Airport. John's last known whereabouts were at the airport at 4:30 p.m. A $1 million reward was announced by the Ministry of Security on Monday, January 23rd, for any information that could lead to the arrest of the person or persons responsible for the murder of Valentina Tres Palacios. The Colombian authorities enlisted the help of Interpol to issue an arrest warrant, as Poulos fled the country's border without indicating why. Additionally, he was the final person to witness the girl's existence. Can you provide some examples? On January 24th, the National Police of Panama stated that they had apprehended Poulos at El Dorado International Airport while he was traveling to Turkey. In an effort to obtain answers about Valentina's death, Colombian authorities quickly began the process of deporting him to the country. Over 14 criminal investigation specialists contributed to the investigation, collecting evidence to establish the facts. The analysis of over 300 hours of video footage from cameras was the outcome of methodological work carried out in partnership with the country's prosecutor office. The case yielded another crucial finding after the arrest of this individual. Valentina's mobile phone was discovered near the El Dorado International Airport by a security staff member. He stumbled upon a mobile phone on the grass while walking near a 10th-of-a-minute gas station and picked it up. The man brought the discovered gadget home after he realized that it did not have a SIM card. He took the phone to sell it, unaware that it belonged to Valentina. The security guard's wife called him hours later in despair when she realized that the photo of the girl and the wallpaper on the mobile phone were identical to those seen on social media, and also for the young woman found dead in the trash container. Unfortunately, the phone had already been marked for sale and repackaged because someone was willing to buy it. Therefore, information that could have been advantageous in this situation went unguarded. Can you provide some examples? Following that, the driver of the car that the couple had driven to the nightclub gave his testimony, which was followed by a big question. The driver was tasked with transporting the couple to a nightclub located in the southern part of the city. Before getting into the car, Poulos paused for a moment before Valentina exited. She got into the car and screamed that she had written something untoward. The driver looked at her in disbelief before checking his phone and finding out that Tres Palacios had sent him a message to customer care, warning him in Spanish that he was in danger. The driver looked at the girl and inquired if she was all right, but her response was uncertain as Poulos entered the car and asked. She said, "Are you okay?" John and Valentina conversed in English as the car was being driven, and the man asked if they were bilingual, to which he replied with a positive answer. Poulos remained silent and instead corresponded with Valentina on WhatsApp. Upon leaving about 4 a.m., the driver went to the nightclub with the couple and then forgot about the incident until he was informed of the young woman's death several days later. Due to Valentina's open WhatsApp session, her friend who lived in Cartagena came to the prosecutor office in Bogota and surrendered their computer, with the chats providing clues about what had occurred. One of the pieces of evidence found in Valentina's chat was that her friend had spotted a suitcase with her body, which was said to have been there. The friend said that on the same day Valentina was in Bogota, she got a text from Poulos and received several selfies with his luggage. The suitcase that John brought with him was akin to the one found by authorities in the container. The color was indistinguishable. There's no clear answer as to why the young girl left her WhatsApp session open on her friend's computer, but all of these texts helped authorities get what happened that night when Valentina was killed. It was determined by forensic investigators that she died from asphyxiation, caused by tightly strangled with a rope. Prior to her passing, there were indications on her body that she had been a victim of violence. All indications from the forensic examination indicate that Valentina Tres Palacios passed away while sleeping. This conclusion was drawn up by criminalists because she was wearing pajamas. There was no doubt in the evidence above that John Puvas was present. The indictment stated that the suspect did not acknowledge responsibility for the girl's death, citing the current situation and the concealment of evidence. Rather, he said, "There were violations when I was arrested in Panama because we did not have a lawyer to talk to." Pulos's Spanish language skills were not strong enough to warrant a translator, and the hearing lasted for more than 5 hours. The crime committed by Pulos is attributed to his involvement with Valentina, and he attempted to disappear without trace, erasing his social media accounts after the incident. On May 19, 1987, John Pulos was born in Wisconsin, United States. He had 3 children and was previously wedded in his native land. His criminal record included charges of violence against women, including obtaining a restraining order against his ex-wife. The use of pornographic websites was reported by a woman to whom John Pulos had sent money, who claimed that this person was actively browsing. According to her, he spent approximately 5-6 hours daily on the site, and she mentioned that despite being a man, his behavior was often bizarre in nature, such as fantasizing and recounting ghost stories. Another model who testified on a modeling page said she knew the American from Texas, America. She ceased writing to him after a peculiar comment he made, which included the words jealousy and death. John's question was, "If I were at a bar, would you be willing to talk to me?" The girl refused in response. "It's likely that one of us will die due to jealousy," replied Pulos. The witness stated that despite the subject having sent money to the magical lord, she never conversed with him on video because his communication was often unusual. It is important to acknowledge that John had certain conduct towards his victims. He contacted Valentina on social media and started sending her money with persistence and consistency in the case. This approach to women's treatment as property was a warning sign that the trusting women initially neglected, and Pulos believed he could purchase them with money from the outset. The factors were disregarded, leading to the possibility that the victim unintentionally stumbled into her abuser's trap and was eventually recognized due to his own mistake. The authorities involved in this case are assuming that John thought the waste disposal system in Colombia was equivalent to that in the United States, where he resided. According to him, the waste material had settled in the container and would eventually be disposed of. Pulos did not assume that recycling workers and street dwellers frequently sift through garbage to discover items that can be sold or employed as something. John Pulos is being held in a private cell in Bogotá today. Now all that remains is to demonstrate that all these pieces of evidence connect the individual to the crime and to discover the motive behind this dreadful murder. In Colombia, the criminal code provides for a prison sentence of up to 50 years for a crime in which an American is accused, with the assistance of a special group formed by the Capitol Police in coordination with the country's Attorney General's office. Criminal investigators will be engaged in the search for material evidence to clarify this fact. Such cases once again demonstrate to us how dangerous social networks can be when getting to know someone. Valentina thought she had found love and someone with whom she would spend the rest of her days. However, this did not happen, and like many people in the world, she too thought that nothing like this would happen to her.